Hello, I'm David Papineau. I'm Professor of Philosophy here at King's College London, and
I'm Philip Goff, lecturer in philosophy at the University of Liverpool and currently at the Centre for Consciousness in Australian National University. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about mind and brain, specifically arguments for and against physicalism. So to start off, David, physicalism is quite a popular view these days amongst philosophers, this view that reality is wholly physical or material in nature. I guess kind of curious about whether you think there are any powerful arguments for this view, or do you think it's just sort of intellectual fashion?
no, I don't think it's a matter of fashion
Right.
at all. I think there's one very powerful argument for this view. I think it's quite widely known as the causal argument, and
Right.
it's the thought that unless the mind were physical, it couldn't have effects in the physical world. I mean, put like that, it sounds a bit. I mean, Descartes was the original anti-physicalist, dualist. He
Right.
thought there was the physical realm, the brain was part of the physical realm, and then there was a separate realm, the mental realm, different substance, and early on, people criticised him, saying, if they're so different, how can they affect each other? In particular, how can the mind have effects in the physical world? But that's not really the argument that bothers people
Right.
now. The argument that bothers people now that pushes them towards physicalism is rather more specific, and perhaps why don't I lay it out
Okay.
as an argument with premises and a conclusion, and we can see
Right.
how it all works. So the contemporary argument starts with the thought that mental events have physical effects. Seems obvious enough. I want to give an example of this, and I raise my arm, right? So there's
Right.
a mental event, my thinking about how to prove this, right? I decide to raise my arm, and then effect, my arm goes up. Movement of matter through the air,
Yeah.
and in general, we think that our feelings, our thoughts, our decisions, mental events have effects on our bodies, and thereby influence the physical world. So
Right.
premise one: mental events have physical effects.
Okay. Seems plausible.
Premise two: in general, physical effects can be fully accounted for by a prior history of physical causes. So think about my arm going up, and think about this from a physiological point of view. You're interested in what are the causes of my arm going up. So
Right.
we know how it goes. Muscle fibers contract, electrochemical messages come down the nerves, because there was some electrochemical activity in the motor cortex. Why did that happen? Well, there's prior electrochemical activity in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex. And from a physiological point of view, you expect to be able to trace the sequence of events back entirely at the physical level. You don't expect to have to go outside the physical realm to find causes for what's going on. Certainly how physiologists think about this. Okay, so premise one, mental events have physical effects. Premise two, physical effects have fully physical causes. So
Right.
what's going on? Do we have two causes, a mental cause for my arm going up and a physical cause? Well, that seems wrong. I mean, sometimes events are overdetermined. They have two independent causes. The favourite philosopher's example, poor chap is shot and struck by lightning
Right.
at the same time. He's killed twice over. It's overdetermined that he's going to die, in the sense that each cause would have been enough on its own. If he hadn't been shot, he still would have died because of lightning. If he hadn't been struck by lightning, he still would have died
Right.
because he was shot. So, but that looks, overdetermination, the wrong model for what's going on in the mind-brain case. We don't want to say that my arm would still have gone up if I hadn't decided to raise it because my motor cortex was firing, nor do you want to say vice versa. You know, if my motor cortex hadn't been firing, my arm would still have gone up because I decided to. I mean, that's what we would say if there were two independent causes, but it's pretty clear that's not what we want to say. So there we have it. I mean, three premises: mental events have physical effects, physical effects have physical causes.
Right.
The physical effects of mental causes aren't all overdetermined. And if you think all those three things, it's very hard to resist the thought that the mental causes are themselves
Right.
part of the physical world. So, I mean, first premise says these effects have mental causes. Second premise says these effects have physical causes. Third premise says they don't have two causes. Not much room for anything else, but the conclusion that the mental causes are, in fact, part of the physical causes. So that
Right.
when I say I decided to raise my arm, or I went to America because I wanted to have a holiday, this talk about decisions and wantings and so on, is in fact referring to part of the physical processes
Right.
giving rise to the behaviour.
Okay.
So that's
We'll get to
the
physicalism.
physicalist argument.
So if there's this great argument for physicalism, why do you think it's physicalism, the popularity of physicalism is a kind of contemporary phenomenon? You know, if there's always been this great argument,
Yeah.
why is historically, before the 20th century, physicalism not been as popular as it has been in sort of late 20th century, 21st century?
Well, I think the history of this argument is very interesting. You might feel a nice simple argument. How come people in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, why weren't they all bowled over it by it? Well, I think if you look at the history, you'll see that this argument wasn't widely endorsed, wasn't available before the 20th century, because one of the premises wasn't available. And in fact, the crucial premise is, as you might have thought, the second one, the idea that all physical effects have fully physical causes. Mm-hmm. And that's, I mean, it doesn't entirely beg the question, but once you've got that premise, then you're pretty much forced to the conclusion, because this premise is saying that the physical causes are kind of squeezing the mental out of the realm of things that make a difference to the effect, unless the mental is itself part of that realm. I think that prior to the 20th century, most scientists, most well-informed physicists just didn't believe this premise. It was different in the 17th century, it worked out differently, but once you had Newtonian physics allowed all kinds of force fields, force of gravity, electrochemical forces, magnetic forces, I mean, all kinds of forces. And Newtonian physicists believed in vital forces that were peculiar to processes in living bodies, and they believed in nervous forces. They believed in mental forces. I mean, the phrase nervous energy is modern idiom that comes from the 19th century people who thought there was a specific force field associated with the nerves in sentient beings, and nervous energy was the potential energy of this force. So until recently, people thought there was a distinct kind of mental influence that made a difference to all the non-mental stuff. And what's happened is that ceased to be part of informed scientific opinion. And it happened in the 20th century. People did research into the way the brain worked, the way nerves worked. And crucial step was Huxley and Hodgkin, middle of the 20th century, worked out how transmission of messages went across from one nerve to another. And it's about that time, I think, scientifically informed opinion, including among philosophers, said yes, there aren't any special mental forces influencing the motion of molecules in the brain. It's all familiar physical stuff, just the forces we find outside the brain. And at that point, you suddenly found a bunch of philosophers arguing in different ways for physicalism. Herbert Feigl, Donald Davidson, Jack Smart, David Lewis. If you look at their arguments, they all appeal to the thought that the physical effects are due to physical causes. And the way I look at it, that form of argument wouldn't have swayed people prior to the 20th century. But once Once,
got the evidence.
but of course, you could resist the argument by saying, no, I don't believe that. I think there are places in the brain where a separate mind comes down and makes a difference to the motion of various neurotransmitters and so on. But nobody much believes that. I mean, if you believe that, you should be going to do experiments to figure out where it happens. And, and I doubt that many contemporary dualists want to bite that bullet.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's something we'll come back to. So, I mean, anyway, that's the argument for physicalism.
Yeah. I mean,
I think it's hard to resist.
Yeah. I mean, I see the force of that argument, and I suppose I think physicalism is, in many different ways, a theoretically attractive position, and the reason you've just given is one powerful point in its favour. But I suppose this needs to be counterbalanced with the fact that there are well-known, quite powerful philosophical arguments against physicalism. So we've got the knowledge argument, the omni-conceivability argument, the explanatory gap argument, and I think physicalists at least have to have an adequate response to these arguments.
Sure.
I mean, I'd be quite curious about your response as a physicalist to, say, the knowledge argument. I guess the most.
Well, why don't you spell out the knowledge argument, and then I will tell you what I think of it.
Okay, so the knowledge argument, I guess one of the most well-known arguments against physicalism. So the most well-known version of it starts with Frank Jackson's story about Mary. So Mary is a brilliant neuroscientist who specialises in colour experience. In fact, she's so brilliant she knows everything that brain science could teach us about what goes on when human beings experience colours. So she knows all this science, but for some reason that's never explained, she's been raised all her life in a black and white room. So she's only ever seen black and white and maybe shades of grey. So she's learned all her brain science watching Open University on a black and white television, let's say. So that's the setup. And then in the dramatic climax of the story, Mary is, again, for some reason it does not explain, she's released from her black and white prison, and let's say she sees a red rose for the first time. So for the first time she actually experiences red. And the proponent of the knowledge argument thinks that at this point Mary learns something new. When she experiences red for the first time, she learns a new fact, namely what it's like to see red, right? There's a fact she never knew before. She learns what it's like to see red. Now, but she already knew all the brain science, right? So this new fact she learns must be a fact that goes beyond what brain science can teach us, right? So there must be more to colour experience than the kind of physical brain science facts. And so physicalism must be false. So this is supposed to be the fact that Mary learns a new fact, even though she already knew all the physical brain science facts, is supposed to show us that there's more to colour experiences than the physical brain science facts. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a very compelling argument. So I suppose I'm curious about how you as a physicalist think about this argument. Or
Okay, so it's a before-after scenario. Before, Mary's in contact with all she knows about all the physical facts. After, she knows about a new fact, so there must be at least one fact that's not a physical fact.
Right.
Okay, so some physicalists kind of want to deny that there is any experiences before, but not in this way. So, I mean, my thought is, right, so there's her old concept, certain oscillations in V4, and her new concept, a phenomenal concept, where she thinks, she imagines what it's like to see red, and she thinks that experience. And I think these are just two different concepts that refer to the same thing, the brain process that red experiences consist in. So she used to be able to think red tomatoes cause oscillations in V4. She now thinks red tomatoes cause it. Now she imagines this experience. But on the right-hand side there, she's just thinking about the same thing, the experience of brain state, but thinking about it in two different ways. So she has new knowledge just like this. There's somebody who knows that Archie Leach was born in Bristol, and then they discover that Cary Grant was born in Bristol. Do they know something new? Well, there's a sense in which, yes, they do. They have a thought involving the concept Cary Grant. They didn't used to. They didn't used to know that. Now they know that. But have they found out about an extra person that used to live in Bristol, a person they didn't know lived in Bristol before? No, there's no extra person involved here. It's just the same person.
Right.
One person was born in Bristol, thought about in two different ways. So there's no extra process here, no extra thing that Mary is thinking about. It's just the old brain process now being thought about in a new way. So that's the phenomenal concept response to Mary.
So I think up to now we're not necessarily disagreeing. So I agree. I think the knowledge argument is a very compelling argument, and I agree with you that the Lewis and the Dennett, particularly the Dennett responses, are not really adequate responses to it. But I think all it shows, at least in the first instance, is what we might call conceptual dualism, right? Which is kind of the view you've just been articulating. So the view that there are these phenomenal concepts, these special kind of concepts we deploy when we think about our conscious experience in terms of what it's like. So, you're in pain, you attend to how the pain feels, and you think about it in terms of how it feels. And in doing so, you deploy a phenomenal concept, this special way of thinking about a conscious state in terms of how it feels or what it's like. So conceptual dualism is the view that there are phenomenal concepts and they're a priori distinct from any physical or functional concepts. Mm-hmm. So, I think the knowledge argument really does make a very strong case for conceptual dualism, that that physical and phenomenal concepts are really radically different kind of concepts. I think you really need to believe that to adequately respond to the knowledge argument. Mm. But, as you say, merely committing to conceptual dualism is not enough to force you to reject physicalism, because you might think, okay, there's these two really different kinds of concept, but they denote the same features of reality, right? So, that's pain and C fibers firing, very different kinds of concept, but they actually refer to the same features, right? So physical concept, phenomenal properties just are physical properties. So far we're not disagreeing, but I suppose, let me kind of put my cards on the table. I suppose my reason for rejecting physicalism is that I hold a very traditional, familiar, philosophical view about the relationship between a subject and her phenomenal qualities, often referred to as acquaintance. We could refer to this view as the acquaintance view, and I think the acquaintance view, in conjunction with conceptual dualism, entails a falsity of physicalism. Right? So it's these two things together. It's this acquaintance view and conceptual dualism together that forces us away from physicalism. So maybe I could explain, spell out a bit more the acquaintance view, and then explain to you why I think, in conjunction with conceptual dualism, we get to the falsity of physicalism. So the acquaintance view is roughly the idea that a subjective experience spurs some very kind of special, certain kind of epistemically intimate relationship with her phenomenal qualities, such that the nature of those qualities is directly revealed to the subject insofar as she attends to them. So if I'm in pain, and in normal circumstances, I can attend to my pain and think about it in terms of how it feels, and in doing so, I grasp the nature of that feeling, in the sense that I understand what it is for a subject to feel that way, right? In attending to how the pain feels, I know what it is for someone to feel that way. I think this is a kind of very familiar traditional philosophical view. Maybe it's something like the relationship the British empiricists took to hold between the subject, between a mind and its ideas, or maybe that the sense datum theorists took to hold between the self and its sense data. And I think, there's a real intuitive pull to this idea that, the subject is somehow so epistemically close to its phenomenal qualities. They're sort of right in the heart of the mind, such that the nature is just sort of laid bare to the subject. I mean, I think we can, no matter whether we ultimately accept that view or not, I think it's there's a lot of intuitive force to that. Okay, so I mean, I could say a few more things in defence of the acquaintance view, but maybe let me just explain why, in conjunction with conceptual dualism, it leads us to the falsity of physicalism. So, I'll just have a bit of water. So suppose the acquaintance view is true. If the acquaintance view is true, the nature of my phenomenal qualities is directly revealed to me, right? At least insofar as I attend to them. But now suppose also that physicalism is true. If physicalism is true, then those qualities just are physical or functional qualities. They have a physical or functional nature, right? So it ought to follow from both these assumptions that that physical or functional nature is directly revealed to me, insofar as I attend to these qualities. So say my pain just is C fibres firing, that constitutes its essential nature, then if the acquaintance view is true, it ought to be that when I attend to my pain, it's just directly revealed to me as C fibres firing. And that seems pretty implausible anyway, but especially when we bring in conceptual dualism. I mean, conceptual dualism seems to be inconsistent with that, because, so conceptual dualism is the principle that phenomenal concepts, the concepts we deploy when we think about, when we tend to our phenomenal qualities, and physical concepts, the concepts we deploy when we think about features of reality in physical terms, these are just completely different kinds of concept, right? Radically different, no a priori connection between the two. But if that's true, it looks like, it can't be the case that introspectively attending to my phenomenal qualities reveals their physical nature. Because if that were true, then physical and phenomenal concepts would be intertwined conceptually. So I think we have an inconsistent triad here. I mean, this is the way I see these issues. An inconsistent triad: conceptual dualism, physicalism, and the acquaintance view. Right? They can't all be true. And because I hold the acquaintance view and I hold conceptual dualism, for the reasons I think we both do, I end up inferring that physicalism is false. So that's I suppose my kind of central reason for rejecting physicalism.
Okay, so let me see if I've got it right. So you agree that the right response to the Mary argument is to say at least that Mary acquires a new concept, a new way of thinking that she didn't have before. We're not yet saying what it refers to, but she's got a new concept, a concept that points to something in reality she didn't have before. So far you're with me. I think it points to a physical state. But you say no. When we focus on the nature of this new concept that we're committed to via the conceptual dualist response, like multiplying concepts to the Mary argument, when we focus on the nature of this concept, we see that it can't possibly refer to any physical entity, because otherwise we'd kind of see straight off. I mean, via reflection using our phenomenal concept that was the nature, but we don't see that. But I want to ask you to explain this argument a bit more, perhaps but how are we doing for time?
We can go in about 20-25 minutes. I think we're okay. Maybe halfway through.
All right. So,
I mean, just a slight qualification of that. I do think there is some just straightforward intuitive force to the idea that phenomenal concepts reveal the nature of what they denote, and I think that has some force. But I also think there are strong reasons to believe the acquaintance view, and that entails that phenomenal concepts reveal the nature of the qualities they denote. So it's not merely, I mean, I think there's the more arguments we can bring to bear to support the acquaintance view. But anyway, maybe we can talk about, I get that you've got the basic structure there.
Perhaps it'll help me to get your argument into focus if you can relate and distinguish it from. an argument that's been much discussed over the past 20 years, which is the two-dimensional argument,
Right,
elaborated by Frank Jackson and then very prominently by David Chalmers,
Right.
which similarly goes along with the conceptual dualist response to Mary, and again says, but when we focus on these special phenomenal concepts, there's a way of seeing that they can't refer to physical states. And so how does your argument
relate,
compare to that argument?
Right, good question. So I suppose so let's it would be useful, I think, to have a name for so let's call phenomenal transparency, right? Let's call phenomenal transparency the thesis that phenomenal concepts reveal the nature of the states they denote, right? So when you employ a phenomenal concept of pain, say, that you can know a priori the nature of that feeling, the nature of pain. I mean, you might compare it to, for example, you might think a similar thing is true of kind of geometrical concepts. You might think if I have a concept of sphericity, I can know a priori the nature of that property. I can know what it is for something to be spherical. It's to have all points on its surface, equidistant from its centre. So the phenomenal transparency thesis is a thesis that that's true of phenomenal concepts. Now, I would defend phenomenal transparency by defending the acquaintance view, this traditional conception of the relationship between a subject and phenomenal qualities, and I think that entails phenomenal transparency. So I think Chalmers, I mean, we can kind of see Chalmers as defending phenomenal transparency, but by a kind of semantic route.
So phenomenal transparency, that's the crucial assumption here, because the argument goes that these concepts are transparent, they will reveal the nature of their reference. If their reference were physical, they would reveal that. They don't, so the reference can't be physical. I mean, if it was a physical thing, given the way we're onto it, we'd see it was physical, but we see it's not physical, so it can't be physical.
Yeah, okay. Especially if we're accepting conceptual dualism, it seems to push them. So we can kind of see Chalmers as I think Chalmers believes in phenomenal transparency, but gets to it by a kind of semantic route. So maybe I could try and explain. I mean, things get very complicated with the two-dimensional argument, so maybe I could just give a rough and ready, maybe slightly oversimplified version of it, which I still think is not too simplified. So the way Chalmers thinks about things, and Frank Jackson thinks in a very similar way, every concept has a primary intention and a secondary intention. And roughly, the primary intention expresses the features of the referent we use to think about it. So to take the case of water, the concept of water, you might think that the primary intention of water expresses the property of being the colourless, odourless stuff that falls from the sky and we find in oceans. These are the features of water we use to think about it. The secondary intention of water, in contrast, expresses the essential nature of water. So this expresses the property of being H2O, right? That property constitutes the essential nature of water. So you see, in many cases, these two things, the primary and secondary intention, can come apart, as is the case in the water example, plausibly. You know, that the properties we use to think about water come apart from the properties that constitute the essential nature of water. In Chalmers' language, the primary and secondary tensions come apart. But it's pretty uncontentious, I think, on both sides of the debate, since Kripke wrote Naming and Necessity. It's pretty uncontentious that this isn't the case with phenomenal concepts. So I think about pain in terms of how it feels. But pain just is essentially a kind of feeling. That's what pain is. It's not like we can bring these two things apart, you know.
I agree about that
right,
too.
Right? Yeah. So it doesn't look like that's the case with phenomenal concepts. And Chalmers' language, it looks like there isn't a distinction between their primary intention and the secondary intention. And you can see, arguably this seems to lead in the direction of phenomenal transparency, because if there's no distinction between the properties I use to think about pain and the essential nature of pain, It looks like it follows from that I think about pain in terms of its essential nature, and that seems more or less to be equivalent to phenomenal transparency. That in deploying phenomenal concepts, the essential nature of pain is revealed to me. In the sense that I think about pain in terms of that essential nature. So there are a lot of complications to the two-dimensional argument, but you can sort of see that's kind of what's going on. That it's a sort of semantic route to phenomenal transparency.
Just to fill that out, I mean, you made Chalmers sound just like you, but isn't it the case that Chalmers gives more hostages to argumentative fortune that you do? I mean, by going down the semantic route, he's committed to certain general theses about the connection between semantics and metaphysics that you might want to.
So that's what I was going to go on to say. I mean, I suppose, the concern I have with, so me and Chalmers, I guess, Chalmers and I both agree phenomenal transparency. I think we both commit to our thesis. But my worry with this semantic route is, as you say, that the framework it relies on, this kind of setup assumes that every concept has a substantive primary intention, that every concept is a priori associated with these certain features that are used to pick out the referent. So every concept is a priori associated with certain features, and we use them to pick out the referent. And I'm not convinced that we're compelled to think that every concept is like that. So
so many of Chalmers' opponents would say, look, proper names, we just pick them up, they refer directly, I've got no conception of the referent. But so this doesn't have a primary intention, some understanding of the referent that helps me there. I just refer to it. But they say in those cases, there's no sense that just by mastering a proper name, you know about all the essential features of the referent. I might know who, Andrew Peacock is without having any idea about anything about him.
Exactly.
So that looks like a counterexample to Chalmers' general thesis.
That's what I was thinking. So I suppose, I sometimes call these concepts radically opaque, right? Not only do they not reveal the essence of the referent, but they don't reveal any accidental features of it either. And all you have to think to believe in these concepts, they're not necessarily, all you have to think is that their reference is fixed sort of wholly outside of what's a priori accessible. Right. So maybe it's fixed by causal connections, maybe that's the name code. Maybe it's fixed by the natural function of the concept, maybe it's fixed by recognitional capacities of the concept user. So I'm not convinced that there's any reason to think there aren't radically opaque concepts, and they do seem to constitute.
So Chalmers has to deny any such things in order to have his semantic premise that leads him to the transparency of phenomenal concept. You just go straight for the transparency of phenomenal concept.
That's right, yeah.
Throwing away all the semantic gubbins that comes before.
Okay. I don't go by the semantic
I've got it.
route.
Okay. So I don't buy the transparency of phenomenal concepts. I think this is a kind of illusion because, after all, I'm a physicalist, right? So I think here we've got these phenomenal concepts. They don't refer by description or anything like that. I grant that, but they're a bit like proper names. They point us to something without showing us very much about the nature of that thing. The nature of the thing is it's physical. It's oscillations in V4, but our phenomenal concepts don't show us these essential features of the referent. That's what I think.
Right. Okay. So we're getting the distinction.
But I think that you're being seduced by a certain feature that we touched on earlier but haven't focused on of the way phenomenal concepts work into thinking that they're transparent. So here's the feature. So I said that what Mary gets, she has the experience, and after she's had the experience, even after the experience is gone, she retains the ability to recreate it in imagination. So she kind of imagines the experience. Or maybe she actually exercises her phenomenal concept when she's actually having the experience. She kind of focuses inwards and says, look, I'm having experience as of something red again. And I'd say that the paradigm cases when we exercise phenomenal concepts are cases where, as it happens, the experience being referred to is actually present in our mind at the same time as we're thinking about it. I mean, either we're having a red experience, we've got the red experience in our mind and we focus on it, or we recreate, as Hume put it, a faint version of the red experience and then kind of think with that. So there's this kind of funny, what philosophers might call a use-mention feature of phenomenal concepts. When you mention the experience of seeing something red, you also kind of use the experience to think about it. So you activate the experience along the way to thinking about the experience. And you can see how this feature might seduce you into thinking that phenomenal concepts were transparent. I mean, when I think phenomenally, the experience is right there in my mind. I couldn't be closer to it, right? I'm feeling red at the same time as thinking about the experience of seeing red. It's right there.
Right, okay.
And so you feel, look, it's so close that everything is revealed. But in fact, I say, no, well, it's kind of close, and maybe in a special way, the referent is close to the concept in a way that's peculiar to phenomenal concepts, maybe. But don't infer from that kind of special closeness that this kind of thinking is going to reveal all the essential features. In particular, don't think it's going to reveal the physical features. I actually think of what I just said as part of a larger view I have about the mind-brain physicalism issue. You mentioned earlier the explanatory gap, and we haven't really talked about that much. And in fact, the term itself is a very contested term. I mean, Joe Levine introduced the notion 30 years ago. David Chalmers thinks it's all to do with his semantic apparatus. Other people have different views. I think the explanatory gap is just, well, I mean, here's the phenomenon. You're told that water is H2O, say, and then we physicalists about the mind come along and say, well, you know, red experience and oscillations in V4 is just the same. We discover via science that just as we discover water is H2O, we discover that the red experience is just a certain brain process. And Joe Levine said, well, okay, maybe, but don't they strike you very differently? Don't you feel when you think about, well, this oscillation in the brain yields, gives rise to red experience. Aren't you puzzled why that should be so in a way that you aren't puzzled in the water H2O case? You don't go, well, why does H2O give rise? We don't say that, but why does this oscillation give rise to this feeling? We do say that. So let's just agree, and I think this is completely uncontentious, with Levine's initial observation that the two kinds of identities strike us very differently. And we kind of feel that we want to explain something in the mind-brain case that we don't in the scientific cases. Why so? Well, people have lots of different views about what's funny about the mind-brain case. Now, my own view, and this is what I think is the right account of the explanatory gap, is that we just find it very hard to believe.
Right.
That this experience, this feeling, this technicolor phenomenology is the same thing as these neural oscillations. We just resist embracing this fact. Now, I regard that as a very interesting psychological, sociological observation, and I'm very interested in how we might explain this, how we might explain what I think of as the intuition of distinctness. I think that the causal argument we started with gives us an overwhelming reason to believe that these two things are the same, but something is preventing us really fully in our guts believing it.
So despite being a physicalist, you're an intuitive dualist. I mean, you almost can't
dualist.
help.
Look, so
I mean, you're not a dualist.
I feel the strength of the dualist intuition, and look, but I don't regard it as very. I feel the strength of intuition standing still. I mean, I've I got over it, grow up. And that's what I feel about the mind brain case. But I think all physicalists should recognize that there is, if you've come with me this far, we should now recognize that there is this strong feeling, just as the feeling that Earth is standing still, that the mind must be different from the brain. And now the question is, why so? Why do we all have the strong feeling? And I think the thing that you've pointed to is one possible explanation. There's something peculiar about the way we think about conscious experiences that makes us feel that we know about them, we know fully about them, it's all transparent, and therefore they can't be physical.
Right.
That's one possible explanation of intuition of distinctness.
Okay,
there are other ones. The Yale psychologist Paul Bloom's written a book called Descartes' Baby, the main burden of which is that our kind of cognitive development pushes us towards dualism from a very early age, and that's why we all find it very difficult to embrace physicalism. And I can think of a number of other possible explanations.
Okay, right, so that's interesting. So let me just, let me say one point on which we maybe agree in what you've just said, and then move back to the point where we disagree. I think maybe what we agree on is in our understanding of the explanatory gap. So, there is this feeling that something needs to be explained in the mind-body case, but if there is an identity there, if pain is identical with C5 timing, if these two concepts just refer to the same state, then there is nothing to be explained. So, I think that's maybe a point we agree on.
I didn't know you agreed with that. I'm very pleased to hear.
Oh, have I said that to you before? Okay, no, I do agree with you on that, yeah. But I was arguing with, I do agree with you on that. But, so I would argue simply that the identity is false. Right? I don't argue that something needs to be, I argue the identity is false. So that's where we agree. Okay, but let's move back to the more fun disagreement. So you think I'm seduced by this natural intuitive picture you're trying to explain of why I hold phenomenal transparency. Now, I do think it's very intuitive. It's a very familiar philosophical view. I do think it's intuitive that, just to put it in an intuitive way, I do that in thinking about how pain feels, you understand what it is to feel pain. I do think that's very intuitive, which sort of captures. But that's not all that's to be said in defense of the view. If that was all I had to say in defense of the view, then there are perhaps strong reasons to be physicalists. We can overcome our intuitions against, in this direction, just as we might. But I think there are strong reasons in favour of what I call the acquaintance view, which entails phenomenal transparency. So maybe I could run you through a couple of those.
You're the timekeeper. How are we doing?
Well, I think we've got another 10 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so...
Don't take too long, because there's something else we need to
I think we'll
come back to.
Well, I think it's important to get the... I don't want it to be just defending with sort of intuitions. So, I think there are a couple of facts about our epistemic situation with regards to phenomenal qualities that the acquaintance view naturally explains. So, very briefly, the thesis which I call rational certainty. So the thesis that we can be rationally certain that certain phenomenal concepts are satisfied. So if I'm in absolute agony, if I've just had my leg cut off, I attend to how my agony feels and I think about it in terms of how it feels, form a phenomenal concept. In normal circumstances, there is just no chance that concept is not satisfied. I can be justified in feeling psychologically certain that concept is satisfied. And I think this is a kind of certainty that we can't have about features of the external world. So I believe that I'm sitting on a chair, I'm justified in that belief such that, I even count as knowing, but I'm not justified in feeling certain that belief is true. There's a small chance that I'm in the Matrix, or it's all a dream or something. So I think this needs to be explained. Second fact I call a priori knowledge is the fact that we have a priori knowledge, I think, of certain essential features of our phenomenal states. The most uncontentious case I take to be that what it's like to see red is similar to what it's like to see orange. It's more similar than, say, what it's like to see black, right? I take it we can know that a priori in the sense that it's the negation of that proposition that phenomenal red resembles phenomenal orange is inconceivable. So I think that the acquaintance view naturally explains both these facts. So We can explain the rational certainty by the fact that the nature of phenomenal qualities is directly revealed to us. So we could say that rational doubt emerges where we think about features of reality indirectly, where I think about a feature of reality in virtue of having an experience. But when a certain feature of reality is sort of directly revealed to us, there's just not enough epistemic distance for rational doubt to emerge. And with a priori knowledge, it's very natural that I grasp the nature of phenomenal orange, I grasp the nature of phenomenal red, and so it's just apparent to me that they have a similar nature. I mean, like in this, right? So I think that the acquaintance view naturally explains these things, and I think these are things that it's very difficult. The possibility of giving an alternative physicalist account of it looks pretty bleak.
I'm not sure we're going to agree here, but let me see if I can lay out the dialectic here. So you think there's a special kind of relation between the mind and certain entities, acquaintance, that has a kind of epistemological superiority. I mean, this is a topic that's coming up nowadays in quite a range of areas, thinking about perception, relation to the physical world, thinking about scientific knowledge. Many people are agitated by the thought that certain kinds of thinking don't put you in the right kind of revelatory contact with the object. I myself am against this idea that we need to be in this kind of revelatory contact with the object in any realm. But of course the points you make about rational certainty and a priori knowledge are substantial points that need to be addressed. So somebody of my camp needs to give some explanation for how it is that our knowledge of our own mental states has some kind of special epistemic reliability. Seems no room for error there. I mean, that's something that I agree needs to be explained, how we can know that red is more similar to orange than to green without just by reflection. I agree that needs to be explained too. So I mean, those are good challenges, but I don't think that in order to explain those things, I'm going to have to posit some special kind of revelatory acquaintance with objects. Right. But as I say, that's a big topic, and
but at least I suppose we focused on the point where we disagree.
Yeah, and there are many people who do feel that this kind of special relationship between the mind and certain objects is terribly important.
Big
so we're not going to be able to sort that out now. But let's wind up by my reminding you that you've got a nasty bit of unfinished business on your side, because we started off with the causal argument for physicalism, and you responded by saying, well, aren't there lots of problems with physicalism? And maybe so. So suppose I concede to you, look, physicalism doesn't make sense. You've got to be a dualist. I mean, I don't think that, but suppose I conceded just for the moment that was so. Now you seem to be stuck with the causal argument that if dualism is true, mental states aren't physical, then they can't have physical effects. Now, I mean, it's a testament to the strength of the causal argument that many dualists, Frank Jackson originally, when he was persuaded by the knowledge argument, David Chalmers perhaps early on, ended up as epiphenomenalists. They recognized the strength of the causal argument. They agreed that if mental states weren't physical, they couldn't have any effects, and they said, oh dear, they don't have any effects in the physical world. They're just like puffs of smoke in the train. They're kind of caused by the brain, but don't do anything. Now, do you want to end up as an epiphenomenalist?
No, certainly not. I agree that wouldn't be a very attractive way to go. But I think there are pretty plausible options. I mean, I'm very attracted to it's sometimes called Russellian monism. So Russellian monism, for the Russellian monist, when we think about physical properties, when we think about brain states, when we think about C fibers firing, we think about it in terms of its extrinsic features. Maybe we think about it in terms of its causal role in the brain. that thing we pick out in terms of its extrinsic features turns out to be a phenomenal quality. So as it were, what we pick out from the outside as a physical property, from the inside is a phenomenal property, or perhaps a sort of proto-phenomenal property. So it's sort of like physical and phenomenal concepts co-refer, and so that gets around our causal worries. And then you might think, well, that sounds a bit like physicalism, but the crucial point is that it's the phenomenal concept that is transparent, that reveals the nature of the referent, not the physical concept. So I mean, I'm attracted to that view, and it seems to have, I mean, in many ways, all the advantages of physicalism, including with regard to the causal problems. But
okay, well, I think I'm happy to concede that. I mean, I think that gets you off the causal hook, and in a way, it's not surprising to me that it does, because the monist view, as you described it, at least in large part, is something I myself am inclined to embrace. I think that physical concepts refer by description. I don't talk of C fibers or oscillations in V4 are referring to something out there that we only know via our knowledge of their causes and effects. And I also think that that certain things so identified, oscillations in V4, are one and the same as the thing I'm thinking about
Right.
when I think about red experience from the inside, as you put it. And so far, I agree entirely with the idea that physics refers by description to things that we refer to directly when we think using phenomenal concepts.
Right.
But only and I agree that if you've got that view, you don't have any causal problems. This thing's a perfectly good thing for having physical effects. The only point of difference is where you say, and the phenomenal concepts reveal their nature, and I don't have any itch that I need to scratch by saying that. So we've kind of ended up with a position where we agree, even if some of the philosophical background,
I don't think I see things
the way we've got there is rather different.
In the way you do. I think we've got another 5 minutes, by the way, because I think we started slightly after 4. But so maybe we can choose a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, I think there are two views we want to sharply distinguish here. I think we do want to distinguish Russellian monism from a posteriori physicalism. I mean, and the reason is, I mean, I think people who draw metaphysical conclusions from the knowledge argument, zombie argument, like myself, like David Chalmers, Galen Strawson, are attracted to this view of Russellian monism. Whereas I think people who don't draw metaphysical conclusions from these arguments, like yourself, Ned Block, Michael Tye, aren't attracted to Russellian monism. I think there are two views we want to clearly distinguish here. And I mean, the difference seems to me to be like this. So both views initially think, no matter how much brain science you know, you're not going to be able to work out the facts about conscious experience. They both initially think that.
Right.
But for the Russellian monist, the reason for that is simply that we don't have a transparent understanding of the physical facts of what's going on in the brain, the physical facts of the brain. If I take it, so here's the way to distinguish the views. I take it that for the Russellian monist, if we had a transparent understanding of the physical properties of the brain, then the connection would become a priori. It would cease to be a posteriori. Would we, if you could, as it were, have a God's eye view of the physical properties in my brain, it would all be a priori. You'd be able to work out all the facts about my conscious experience. Whereas I take it that the a posteriori physicalist thinks that the connection is a posteriori, not because there's something about the physical we don't know, but because phenomenal concepts don't reveal the nature of phenomenal properties. And that would be the case even if we had a God's eye understanding of the physical. So I take it that for the a posteriori physicalist, if we had a transparent understanding of the physical, it would still be a posteriori the connection. We still wouldn't be able to work out the mental facts of the physical. And that's a crucial difference.
I'm not sure I really have a clear grasp of this difference, because you're doing this highly counterfactual thing that inviting me to suppose that we have a transparent understanding of the physical nature on the physical side, and then wouldn't it all be... And I don't really countenance transparent understandings anywhere, so I don't know what I'd be committed to about what would be the case if we had such a thing. So I'll just go back to the point I made earlier. So you describe Russellian monism, so the physical terms refer by description, and the phenomenal concepts refer directly, and they both co-refer to the same thing, and I agree about that. And then you, and I agree, many of the other people who endorse Russellian monism think it's important, add in that the phenomenal concepts refers in a direct relevatory way, and I never needed to say that, so I think we should just settle that point.
Maybe we've come back to our the crux of the disagreement from a different angle. Yeah. I mean, I suppose from my perspective, the notion of a transparent concept, a concept that reveals the nature of the state it denotes, is this sort of fundamental concept in metaphysics. Right. Because I mean, I think when we want to know what's your metaphysical view, we want to know, I mean, not just what facts you think obtain, but what facts you think obtain under transparent concepts. We want to know, what you think of the nature of reality is, as it were, from a God's eye point of view. That's what metaphysics is all about. So to me, this is a crucial difference to whether you think phenomenal concepts or... Okay. So maybe that's the background.
And I think metaphysics is just an abstract branch of science, and we figure out the right views by looking at the evidence and reasoning inferentially, and there's nowhere in metaphysics at all any essential demand for this kind of revelatory insight. So maybe our difference comes from this rather further back difference in how we think about metaphysics.
What metaphysics is.
Good.
Cool. Okay.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Excellent.
Thank you.